Tonight on Greater Boston, I'm joined by the attorney for Brian Flores. He's the former Pats assistant coach and head coach of the Miami Dolphins, who's accusing the NFL of racist hiring practices, resulting in a league that's, quote, managed much like a plantation. Then a little bit later, Chuck Christian. He's a former University of Michigan football player who helped bring to light decades of sexual assault of more than 1,000 people at the school. He joins me on why he feels the university still isn't taking responsibility with their $500 million settlement, how the abuse has affected him in the years since, and the message he wants to share with other survivors. Who would have thought when the news of Tom Brady's official retirement broke yesterday that it would be just the second biggest NFL story by nightfall? Thanks to a class action lawsuit filed by Brian Flores. In it, he accused the league of racial discrimination against black coaches and brings forward some pretty compelling evidence, courtesy of his former boss, Patriots head coach Bill Belichick. As the suit lays out, after Flores was fired from the Dolphins last month, he applied for other head coaching positions, including with the New York Giants. But then a few days before his interview, Bill Belichick texted him, congratulating him on getting the job. After some back and forth, Flores realized Belichick mistook him for Brian Daboll, another NFL coach who is white and who Belichick had apparently been told already had the job. Flores described his reaction on CNN this morning.
It was humiliating, to be quite honest. I was going on an interview for a job that was already handed to someone else.
Flores and his attorneys say his interview was a sham conducted only to comply with an NFL rule that requires minority candidates be considered for certain jobs within the league. The suit also alleges major misconduct surrounding Flores' firing from the Dolphins, claiming the writing had been on the wall since Flores refused to accept bribes from the team's owner in exchange for tanking games so they could get a top draft pick. And it's not just Flores. The lawsuit claims to act on behalf of more than 40 black coaches, coordinators, specialty coaches, and others who they believe were being discriminated against throughout the NFL.
Look, I love coaching football, and I still want to coach. Let's be clear about that. But this is bigger than coaching. This is bigger than me. Many have come before and done a lot to create change in this country for people of color. And I just felt like, in this instance, it was my turn to step up.
Michael Willeman, one of Brian Flores' attorneys, joins me now. Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me this evening.
You contend that Giants interview was a pretense, a sham, to feign compliance with the so-called Rooney Rule. Would you have known that were it not for Bill Belichick's texts?
Probably not. And that was certainly the initial indication, of course, that our client had, that the interview that he'd be walking into just a couple of days later would be for a job that had already been given to someone else.
Why did he decide to go through with it after it was pretty clear from those texts that the job would not be his, that he had no chance for the job, that it had been filled?
Well, I think Mr. Flores would tell you, as a man of integrity and as a man who likes to think the best and hope the best in others, that he can go into that interview and, notwithstanding the circumstances, do a great job, as he did, and be fairly considered for the job. Unfortunately, that's not ultimately what happened, but he was a man of his convictions, wanted to make sure he saw the process through, and ultimately brought this litigation once it was clear that equal opportunity was not going to be afforded.
You know, Devin McCourty, obviously a legendary Patriot, has been on the show quite a few times, tweeted about the litigation lawsuit fired by his former coach. He said, Flo has always been a special individual, has been pivotal in my career, and love that I can support him for calling out what we all already know. Is Mr. Flores getting support from players in the league, other coaches? Obviously, he's only one other black head coach, but some of the people on whose behalf he's acting?
Yeah, he's been getting just a groundswell of support from players, from former coaches, GMs, et cetera. I mean, he's, the only person, the only entity now that's not supporting him really is the NFL, who literally an hour after we filed this 60-page lawsuit without having done any investigation, demonstrating a total lack of introspection, just declared that it was without merit.
Well, let's read part of their what you would call lack of introspection. Here's part of a statement from the NFL yesterday. The NFL and our clubs are deeply committed to ensuring equitable employment practices and continue to make progress in providing equitable opportunities throughout our organizations. Diversity is core to everything we do, and there are few issues on which our clubs and our internal leadership team spend more time. We will defend against these claims, which are without merit. I assume that means because they have a contract with Jay-Z, they care about the issue. What's your reaction, Michael, to the statement from the NFL, the response?
Well, it's a completely ridiculous statement. I saw a tweet the other day that that noted that diversity must be so core to them that it never comes to the surface. And that's actually, why we're bringing this lawsuit. To say that we've made progress when almost 20 years ago, when the Rooney Rule was passed, there were more black head coaches in the NFL than there are today is ridiculous. And we've had Troy Vincent, who's a senior vice president or an executive vice president, at the NFL, has come out and said there is a double standard. The chief diversity officer over there has come out and said, this is our problem. We need to embrace this. And they're just not willing to do it.
Let's focus on those numbers for a second. I'll tell you, they are staggering. And long before your client filed this suit, I hope people who suggest they care about equity and fairness and tolerance would focus on these. The Rooney Rule, correct me if I'm wrong, is 20 years old. There have been 15 black coaches total in those 20 years. 10 hired in the past decade. Every single one of them is gone. So that today we have one black coach in the whole head coach in the whole NFL. Is that accurate?
That's right. And 14 out of the 15 black coaches that have been hired since the Rooney Rule, of course, have been terminated. Whereas you look at white coaches who have been given second chances, who have been given longer tenures, and who remain employed in positions with equal or lesser success than the black coaches who have lost their jobs.
Yeah, I should have mentioned one critical number that I left out that I think people have learned if they didn't know it in the last 24 hours. Well, I said one black coach, who I believe is Mike Tomlin from Pittsburgh, who's been there forever. 70% roughly of the players in the NFL are black. That's roughly right?
That's right. And the coaching ranks largely come, at least in the first instance, from players, from that 70% black pool.
Is the color of Mr. Flores' skin also part of the reason why he thought he lost his job with the Dolphins, considering a pretty good record there over the past couple of years?
Well, that's correct. And there are various reasons for that. But just on its face, it's completely absurd that Mr. Flores lost his job in Miami. He coached them to 2 back-to-back winning seasons for the first time in nearly 2 decades, and ultimately was let go and then really maligned in the media using stereotypes that are often attributed to black people.
We're trying to focus here on the racial discrimination claims, but this allegation against the owner of the team, I want to make sure I got this right. Your client is contending that the owner of the team was offered him $100,000 for every game he lost, because that would raise their number in terms of their ability to draft a top player. Is there, other than your client's word, is there any evidence that this owner actually offered this? It's a bribe. Offered this bribe?
Well, when you use the term evidence, I think it's important to kind of break that down a little bit. Look, the owner told Mr. Flores exactly what you just said, but this was not just one conversation. This was an ongoing theme in the Dolphins organization, where when Mr. Flores did not start losing games at the pace that the owner was happy with, he started getting pressure from his general manager and others in the organization saying, look, you're compromising our draft position. So when you talk about what the evidence will show, this is not going to have been a secret, let's just say, in the Miami Dolphins organization.
My understanding is in your pleadings, you also include some discussion of race norming. Could you explain for people who haven't followed what it is and why it's relevant to your client's case?
Sure. So race norming is essentially, to simplify it, making assumptions based on someone's race with respect to, in this particular circumstances, their cognitive abilities. And the reason it's important is that when the NFL entered into its concussion settlement a few years back, people would make claims, former players would make claims of cognitive disabilities based on the fact that they played football. And what the NFL said was, if you're black and you're making a claim of cognitive disability, but you didn't start the analysis with the assumption that you're not cognitively as able as a white person to begin with, then we're going to call into question your claim that you've been disabled. It's absolutely disgraceful.
And by the way, there's no denying on the part of the league they had used that. What's the relevance of race norming to your client's case here?
Well, look, ultimately, I think you see a pattern throughout NFL history, starting with players to begin with, then starting with black quarterbacks, then to black coaches, head coaches, et cetera, and especially front office people, where there is historic perception, I believe, that black individuals are simply not smart enough to do the jobs that white people think require a high level of intelligence, like quarterbacking, like offensive coordinators, quarterback coaches, head coaches, GMs, et cetera. And that's, I think, at the root of the problem.
You also, in your pleadings, you say in certain critical ways the NFL is racially segregated and is managed much like a plantation. Could you flesh that out a little bit for us?
Sure. Well, you have a situation where, look, no one is saying that NFL players, the black ones nor the white ones are slaves, right? But what we're trying to point out is that you have a league that has no black ownership. We have white billionaire owners who own the teams, and you've got front offices that are largely white. And you've got these individuals who are profiting off of not only the work, but the injuries, the devastation, the broken bones, the torn ACLs, the cognitive disabilities of a largely black workforce.
You know, when I read about the case, I saw your client on CNN this morning. I'm assuming everybody who's focused on this last 24 hours has had almost the exact same reaction that I have had, which is that you contend that racism interfered with your client's career. Is he not worried that speaking out is going to end his career? Who is going to hire Brian Flores when he has the courage to stand up and say the things he's been saying about owners, about the league, about all that sort of thing?
Well, he is unfortunately concerned because we've seen the NFL and other organizations time after time blackball people who do stand up. But I think that is an important point to make for people to understand how credible Mr. Flores is. He could have gone away. He could have gotten a coordinator job somewhere. He could have stayed in the running, and he is at least ostensibly still in the running for some other head coach jobs. But he felt so strongly about this. And at the age of 40, not on his way out the door, at the age of 40 in the prime of his career, that he was going to bring this suit because of the wrongs that he's observed at the NFL.
Well, Colin Kaepernick 2.0, in my estimation. What is he looking for? What does he want to get out of this lawsuit?
It sounds simple, but change. At the end of the day, right now, it starts with the owners, right? We have a virtually all white ownership. We have no black owners. We need black owners in this league. We need more black people in the front office. We need more black head coaches, coordinators, et cetera. And so he's going to use this platform and this lawsuit to attempt to drive change in the NFL.
Michael Willeman, thanks so much for your time, and thank your client for his courage. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Good evening.
Be well. As you may have seen, the University of Michigan agreed to a settlement last month of $490 million paid to more than 1,000 survivors of sexual abuse by Dr. Robert Anderson, the sports physician who practiced at the school for decades up until 2003. And before I continue, I should note that much of what we're about to talk about over the next several minutes is disturbing. Among the many people Anderson preyed on was Chuck Christian, who played football at University of Michigan from 1977 to 1980. 2 years ago, he publicly came forward to talk about how Anderson made him and his fellow players undergo unnecessary, painful rectal exams as part of their routine physical, and how they were all told they couldn't play otherwise. But it was not until 2 years ago that Christian learned of an investigation into the past actions of Anderson, who at that point had died. That investigation was brought about by former Michigan wrestler Tad DeLuca, who wrote to the school's athletic director in 2018, and the school started quietly looking into things. But that was actually DeLuca's second attempt to sound the alarm after he claimed he was thrown off the team for trying to bring up the issue to his then coach and then athletic director back in 1975, 2 years before Christian's abuse started. Chuck Christian, now an artist based in Randolph, Massachusetts, joins me. Chuck, it's really good to meet you. Thank you for your time tonight.
Nice meeting you. My pleasure.
When was the first time you ever told anybody about what Anderson did to you?
Well, when it first happened my freshman year, I spoke to some upperclassmen to see if that was normal because I'd never experienced anything like that. I'd never been penetrated like that by a doctor before. So I spoke with the upperclassmen and they said, oh yeah, that's a normal physical here at Michigan. And that's when, that was my first experience with Anderson.
So what was the point in your life where you realized it wasn't just a normal thing, but it was criminal assault, rape, essentially? When did you first realize that?
I was 60 years old. I'm 62 now, so that was 2 years ago. And I was in the hospital because I have prostate cancer and it metastasized throughout my body. And I'm in, I'm in pretty tough shape right now, honestly. But my friend called me 2 years ago and he said to me, he said, Chuck, you remember the physicals that Dr. Anderson gave us? I said, yeah, well, of course I can't forget those. And he said, well, what he was doing to us was illegal. And that's when I found out that I had been raped.
Because of these rapes by Anderson, you didn't see a doctor for a pretty significant part of your adult life. Is that correct? For how long?
That's correct. I would avoid doctors no matter what. My wife kept trying to get me to go to see a doctor, but I wouldn't go because I didn't trust doctors at that point. So I decided that, whatever it was, I could just tough it out and I'd be all right. So that's why I never went to see a doctor.
And when you finally did, my understanding is when you finally did, I think in your mid-40s, when your wife essentially pushed you, I think because of high blood pressure or something. From what I've read, you didn't stay long. Why?
What happened was I went to I was actually having trouble with my prostate at that point. I was having blood in my urine and I went to see a urologist about it. And when I went to see the urologist, he said that he wanted to do a digital exam. And to me, a digital exam sounds harmless. I'm thinking like CD players, DVD players, things like that. So I'm not thinking anything painful. But my wife was in the room with me, and then the doctor went over into the corner and he grabbed the glove and he put it on and he snapped it, pow. And when he snapped it, I said, oh no. And I jumped up out of my seat and I pointed at him. I said, you're not gonna do that to me. Nobody's ever gonna do that to me again. And my wife said, Chuck, you need to stick around and find out what's going on with your prostate. I said, oh no, I know what he's gonna do. That's not gonna happen again. I'm a 45-year-old man now. I'm not an 18-year-old kid. And I walked out.
So when was it? How much later was it? Was it not until you were 60 that you got this prostate cancer diagnosis?
About 11 years later, I found out that I had prostate cancer because I was getting up 8 to 10 times a night to go to the bathroom. And after my wife got me to go to the doctor, I realized that I had prostate cancer and it had metastasized throughout all of my bones, spine, tailbone, shoulders, everything.
It's hard to ask this, but you've been forthcoming. What's your prognosis, Chuck?
Well, when I first got the prognosis from the doctor, I had a team of 3 doctors, and 2 of them gave me 3 years to live. So I immediately fired them, and I turned to the 3rd doctor. I said, how many years are you giving me? And he said, I'm just gonna be with you as long as I need to be, Chuck. And I said, okay, fine, good answer. And that's how I found out I had 3 years to live. And now it's been almost 6 years now, and I'm still plugging away.
Well, I hope you keep plugging, even though, when reading about your story, it seems not only, did this doctor sexually assault you? I hope these doctors are wrong, but he could have ended up killing you too. Did Bo Schembechler was your coach, and
yes.
For non-football fans, one of the most legendary college coaches ever. There's pretty decent evidence, including, I think, from his stepson, that like the Joe Paternos of the world, Schembechler knew what was going on and just stood by silently and let it happen.
Yes, he did. Bo would brag about knowing everything that was going on with his team. And so he knew exactly what Anderson was doing to us, but he never stopped it. And that's what really broke my heart. And that's what we needed. We just needed one person to stand up for us to stop this thing, but nobody did.
I mentioned in the introduction, Chuck, that Michigan recently paid a $500 million settlement to more than 1,000 people who'd been abused, violated by this Anderson psychopath. But you're not satisfied that that's, from what I understand, a decent level of accountability. What's missing in your estimation?
The thing is, Michigan has apologized for what Anderson has done to us, but Michigan never apologized or taking responsibility for what they allowed and protected Anderson to do to us.
And you're convinced that it wasn't just Schembechler, but others in the administration that turned a blind eye to all this stuff?
Definitely. The coaches, all of the coaches knew, all of the trainers, the athletic director knew, everybody knew what Anderson was doing, but nobody stopped it.
You know, I assume people who follow are upright and follow the news, USC, Michigan State, Ohio State, Penn State, University of Michigan. You know, when I read your story and read about your courage, I said to myself, good, this will mean it's less likely to happen in the future. But then I step back and say, when there's the kind of power differential that there is between a legendary coach, an all-powerful coach, and a teenage kid who, how does this ever stop?
I think, first of all, there needs to be a third party involved, not a coach, not a trainer.
Meaning somebody you can go to?
Somebody that we can go to, that the athletes can go to if they have any questions about what's being done or if they feel uncomfortable about anything that's taking place. If they had somebody like that, that could squash it pretty much overnight. But because a lot of times players will go to the assistant coaches and trainers, but the head coach has the power to get rid of them. So they're not gonna fight for us, not for the athletes.
So what's your message to survivors? I mean, what's your message to people who've suffered this kind of pain?
First of all, I would like to see all of the men who have been violated to start going to see a doctor. Do not do like I did. I waited too late to go, and now I'm fighting for my life every day. I have a time bomb in my body that's waiting to go off at any point. And I just want the men to go ahead and get prostate exams so that, and it doesn't have to be a digital exam. There are blood tests that can be taken where you don't have to be feel re-violated again. So that's what I would say for the men out there. Also, for anybody that's been sexually assaulted, first of all, I want them to know that they have done nothing to be ashamed of. And that's what happens so often, is that the predator uses shame to keep the victims quiet. And the average age of a man to tell what happened to them is 52. And at age 52, a lot of damage has occurred in that man's life. But I just want everyone to know that, listen, it's not your fault. What happened to you is not a reflection of you. It's a reflection of the predator. And that's what I would tell him.
It's a really important message. And I'll say to you, Chuck, that I just hope your doctors continue to be wrong. And I really thank you for spending the time with your message and your story tonight. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate
Hail to
it.
the victims.
That's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching, and please stay safe.
Hey folks, Edgar B. Herwick III here from GBH's Curiosity Desk, where you ask questions and I find answers. Today, we answer a question about the rules of the road in Massachusetts that came to us from Watertown's Mary Ann Merrigan. Drivers here in Massachusetts are actually pretty lucky that they can turn right on red at any intersection. It's a relatively recent phenomenon, and it came to pass because, of all things, unrest in the Middle East in the 1970s. Bet you didn't see that coming. The 1973 oil crisis pushed gas prices sky high here in the US, so Congress passed sweeping legislation that required states to come up with a plan to reduce gas consumption. Now, they offered big money to the states to help them get those plans off the ground, but in order to get those dollars, there was a catch. States had to have
a traffic law or regulation which, to the maximum extent practicable, consistent with safety, permits the operator of a motor vehicle to turn such vehicle right at a red stoplight after stopping.
The thinking was that allowing right turns on red would mean less idling and therefore less gas consumption, and hey, as a bonus, it might also reduce emissions. Some states already allowed a right turn on red. Congress wanted every state to allow it. And the very last state to comply, you guessed it, Massachusetts. And it appears we did so grudgingly. When right turns on red became legal here in 1980, some 90% of the state's traffic signals were outfitted with a no turn on red sign. Then, and now, officials in each city and town decide which intersections in their communities should get a no turn on red sign. Here in Watertown, one of those deciding officials is Steve Magoon. He explained to me that there are 3 reasons he might choose to restrict a right-hand turn on red. The flow of traffic and the timing of nearby traffic lights.
If people made a right turn on red, but then had to stop very shortly after that, they could back up into the intersection.
Obstructions. Something like a building might prevent a driver from seeing oncoming traffic. The most common reason? Protecting pedestrians.
If you allow someone to turn right on red and that person's looking for vehicles coming to their left, they're not looking for pedestrians on their right.
So, there you have it. Oh, and a quick note of irony before we go. It turns out that allowing that right turn on red doesn't really do that much to reduce emissions. In fact, today, a lot of environmentalists prefer to restrict the right turn on red because it protects pedestrians. Yes, better way to reduce emissions? Don't get in the car in the first place. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and most importantly, let me know what you are curious about, because hey, I might just look into it for you. I'm Edgar B. Herwick III. Stay curious out there.